Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming today. Welcome to Next Level. We have a very, very exciting day of talks for you to close out the AI Festival at King's. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm so glad so many of you have turned up. Before we go on, there is a full schedule online of all of our talks today. You can find it at this link, bit.ly/nextlevel23. But the big things we wanted to mention is we have a few breaks scheduled. During the breaks, there will be drinks available in the kind of auditorium at level 0 where our AI exhibition is. So you can also have a wander around, grab a cup of coffee. And during our lunch, we'll have over an hour to wander around. It's a lovely day outside. There's lots of places you can go for lunch in the local area. But just over the way, this isn't a great map. We're kind of here where it says the Strand Building, King's College London. There's a Greggs, there's places like Leon and Pret, there's other restaurants around, lots of places to go and get lunch and stretch your legs and see the lovely scenery outside Bush House. And then your badges should get you back in the building for our afternoon talks. Often at events, we thank people at the end, but I wanted to get the thanks up front because I've been organizing events like this for over a decade, and this has been by far the easiest one I've ever been involved with. And one of the reasons for that is the amazing group of people at King's who've been helping us put it together. It includes people on the comms team, people in the Institute for AI, people within the department helping us with students and finance and all this stuff. This is not an exhaustive list, but just thanks to everyone who's helped get us to where we are today. I'm sure we'll thank them again at the end as well, but I just wanted to thank them all up front now. I'm really looking forward to today. I'm really looking forward to all of the talks we've got in store for you. It's a really interesting and weird time to be talking to people about AI and games, and lots of our speakers are at interesting and unusual times in their careers and research and work right now as well, and it's lovely to have you all here to share us with. And so we're going to start with our first speaker, which is Mark Brown. So please give a warm welcome and a round of applause as we get our first talk set up.
Thank you very much.
Mic good?
Is the mic good? Yes, it is. Hello, hello, hello. Thanks very much for coming. My name is Mark Brown, and I'm going to talk about how game designers use AI to support gameplay goals. So just to explain who I am, I run a YouTube channel called Game Maker's Toolkit, which is basically a series of sort of video essays about game design, looking at individual games or specific mechanics or systems or levels or whatever. I also do interactive video essays. You can play along by yourself at home. I'm working on my own game and sharing the sort of disastrous process of that as it goes along. I run a yearly game jam, tutorials, accessibility content, the works. I make stuff about video games on the internet. It's a real job. Video game AI is kind of dumb, really, is what I'm here to tell you. Specifically, you know, like proper video game AI. It is not like the stuff that probably everyone else is going to be talking about here today, things like ChatGPT and DeepMind or even Siri, you know, things like when we hear the word AI, especially at the moment in the news, we're talking about you know, machine learning and neural networks and large language models and all this sort of stuff. That is not what video game AI is. To put it simply, video game AI is like, you know, you might have an enemy in a stealth game and they have a very simplistic way of understanding what the world is around them, like a series of inputs, like maybe a sort of vision cone, a literal sort of cone of cheese in front of their eyes. And if the player character trips that view cone, then they have seen the player, things like that. If they see the player, then they have like some kind of system of rules for how they are going to act next. Like, if I see the player, then I should enter an alert phase and chase after them. If a certain amount of time passes, then quit that and go back to idle. A series of sort of state machines or behavior trees. System of sort of if this, then that type rules, usually. Maybe some pathfinding to get around the environment, make sure the enemies are not tripping up on boxes and stuff. And if we're really lucky, then you know, the guards or the enemies in the game might be able to sort of have some collective intelligence to be able to talk to each other and kind of share their knowledge about the player or the environment around them. This is amazing stuff. It makes for some brilliant, fantastic games that we all love playing, but it is ultimately not a huge leap from Pac-Man back in 1980, where The ghosts have a sort of understanding of what's going on around them. They have some kind of pathfinding to get around the maze. They have like a system of rules where, say, if Pac-Man grabs the power pellet, then they scatter to the other side of the map. And then when he doesn't have it, they chase him down. There's a clever series of decisions that the ghosts have where they're each told where to go to in the maze based on Pac-Man's current position and direction. Like one will go specifically directly to Pac-Man, another one will go a few grid tiles in front of him, another one will try to go behind him. Together, it looks like it has this sort of simulation that they are working together and can get you in like a pincer movement and all this clever stuff. Now, I don't think that the sort of lack of massive amounts of change in video game AI is down to the technology. We have supercomputers inside these consoles nowadays, or down to a lack of developer know-how or knowledge or skill or anything like that. I mean, because there is some like real AI in video games. In the Forza series, they use a type of machine learning to build what they call drivatars, this understanding of how you drive around the track, and then they can sort of build a fake version of you that your friends can play with if you are not online. So there is some like machine learning type stuff going on in AI. But the most of the stuff we see is this sort of, we might call dumb AI. But the reason why this is there, I think, is because it's asking what is the purpose of AI in video games? Is it to perfectly replicate a real human being and to trick us into thinking that the Goombas in Super Mario Brothers are real thinking creatures? No, not so much. I mean, video games, they don't really have this problem because ever since the invention of broadband internet, it's no problem to find other people to play with. There might be some need for like bots online and stuff, but for the most part, if you want to play Fortnite, it's very easy to find 99 other 12-year-olds who will destroy you and call you terrible names online. But in terms of single-player AI, the goal is not to replicate a real human, but it's to serve the gameplay, to serve the needs, to serve the experience that the designers are coming up with. As a sort of simple example, in Super Mario Brothers, the goal of the game is to run around and control this little plumber guy and make him jump over things. And the challenge is, can you make these jumps? For example, can you jump over this hole? That's a challenge. That's the gameplay. The Goomba is an AI, but its entire job is to ask, can you jump over or onto a moving target, a little guy who moves left and right? That's his goal in life. Would it be better? Would Super Mario Brothers be better if the Goombas could work together and unionize and make a tower and crush? Maybe that does sound quite good. But ultimately, no, the point of Super Mario Brothers is it's a challenging game about jumping and moving around. That's kind of all we need. Video games have, of course, come a long way since Super Mario Brothers. We have games where we're fighting enemies in a massive three-dimensional world with verticality. The characters might look more realistic and have voice acting and all that sort of stuff. But the gist of it is ultimately the same. I think a good example comes from Uncharted 4. There are sequences in this game where you are hiding from enemies. You are in some long grass, and the enemies are all trying to find your character. The developers, Naughty Dog, were working on some pretty complex AI rules and stuff, and had all this knowledge about where the character was, but ultimately decided to scale it back because the goal of these NPCs, according to one of the gameplay designers, is searching for the player. It's not to find the player. That's not its job. It's not like trying to give it this high-level goal of like find the player in this grass. It's to present interesting gameplay, to have them spread out in interesting locations that you can move through the grass, to have them moving in a way that's mildly predictable, so you get caught and oh no, and then sneak away and then grab behind them to create these moments of drama and tension and cinematic moments like that. Maybe another way of thinking about it is to use a very famous video game design framework called MDA, stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics. It's this sort of causal relationship where we have mechanics, which are the things that the game designers make. These are the what's in the code, what's designed. This is the objective rules of the world. So for example, in Resident Evil 7, a rule that we can describe is that ammo in this game is very sparse. It's hard to come by. You can only hold a very small amount of it in your inventory at once. The dynamics then is, how does that make you act? How does that make you play? How does that change your behavior when you're playing the game? So if you don't have very much ammo, you're going to pick every shot wisely. You might avoid enemy encounters. You might run out of bullets and have to avoid enemy encounters, and you're going to be scavenging for bullets. And then aesthetics is, well, how does that make you feel? Like, what is the emotional reaction of playing in that way? So if you're avoiding enemies and all this sort of stuff, it's going to make you feel fearful and anxious and overwhelmed and underpowered and all of the emotions that they want you to have with Resident Evil, a horror game, a spooky, scary game. And so if we can sort of flip the script, for example, so we can have you have loads of ammo in a game like Doom. We can have humongous amounts of it. We're showering the player with it. How does this make the player act? Well, they're no longer cowering in fear. They're no longer avoiding enemies, but just sort of wildly shooting in the general direction of any demon they see. And how does this change the aesthetic? Well, now you feel powerful and dominant, and now you are this sort of demon hunting badass in hell. And so ultimately, AI is just a type of mechanic. It is something that we can tweak and tune and change in the game to change how the player will act, which will change how the player will feel and hopefully get us closer to our sort of gameplay goal. A good example actually does come from Doom. When id Software, the developers of Doom, first put these imp demons into the game, they had them rushing towards the player. They said, they look like these horrible little nightmare bastards. Let's have them so they are charging towards the player like these little demons from hell. But what it would do to the player is they would immediately get up on their heels and back up and back themselves into a wall because these things are coming towards them. And it made players feel overwhelmed, and it made players feel, underpowered, which was not what Doom was going for. This is the game with supposed to make you feel like this, but players were up against the wall. So they changed the AI. They made these enemies dumber. They told them to stand still, to hold their ground, to maybe run away from the player. This changes the relationship you have with them. Now the player is the one initiating combat. The player is the one chasing towards these enemies. The player is the one in control, making you feel more like a predator. So, which is why I would say there's no such thing as like good AI in video games. There's not something where it's like a universal truth for how game AI should be done. In the same way, there's no such thing as good game design or good gameplay. It's entirely dependent on what we're trying to do. We might be able to have some rules or universally agreed upon things for what we might think of as good AI in other domains. We might want AI to be accurate or competent or intelligent. But when it comes to video games, it's going to depend entirely on what we're going for. For example, take the game Batman Arkham games. These games are about making you feel like you are Batman, putting you in the shoes of the Dark Knight, making you feel like you're in those movies and comics that we know. And so if we have a sequence where Batman is hiding up in the rafters and supposed to be taking down these guards one by one from the shadows, we need to change the AI to work in that way. So in this game, the guards are told to not look up. They're told to ignore the rafters, meaning that the player as Batman has this safe space where they can hunt from this high, lofty position and look down upon the guards. They're told to not look around behind them. So if they're walking through the level, they never look over their shoulders to see if Batman is behind them, giving the player a chance to sneak up and grab them. And they're told, through their voice acting, to have these sort of quivering voices of like, has anyone seen the Batman? You can actually see their heart rate going up in the UI to kind of just give you that sensation that you are the predator. But if we change to something like Alien Isolation, this is completely the opposite. We want in this game you play as a human survivor on a space station with this nasty xenomorph running around. Well, in this case, you should feel more like the guards, and that should feel more like Batman. So the AI for the alien is told to, for example, I believe it is able to sort of teleport around. So if it goes outside of the camera, it can actually teleport behind you and sneak up behind you and get in for a quick kill or a quick scare. Or the AI is told to not use like sort of scripted behavior, but much more systemic, so it's less predictable and feels less like this sort of super scripted character. And also, it should feel like it's smart and evolving. So the designers gave it a number of sort of abilities that it locks off at the beginning of the game. And then as you go through the story and as you see the alien more and more, it sort of unlocks these behaviors, giving the illusion that the alien is sort of learning from you and getting more smart as time goes on. I think if there is one universal truth, though, for all AI, is that it centers around the player. It is the entire point of an AI is to promote the experience that is interesting for a player, to challenge them, to entertain them, to compete with them, those sorts of things. I sometimes think of it as like the holograms or the these automatons you see in theme park rides. They don't have any other external life. They're not doing anything outside of when the ride comes along. Suddenly they come alive. That is their whole role, is to do something for the player. And so I want to kind of share some tips that we can use to boost the value of AI in terms of centering on the player. So one is that AI should cheat, but in the player's favor. An example of this is from the Far Cry game. So in these games, you might go into a camp full of enemies, 10, 12, 15 enemies fighting you. But there's a sort of invisible AI director who will tell the guards to only allow a few of them at once to shoot at you. Otherwise, you're going to be, just turn into, cottage cheese on the floor if there's 15 guys shooting you at once. We need to have it so you kind of have the sensation that you're fighting all of these people, but ultimately you get that experience of being this sort of action hero superstar. When we ask sort of players, what do you want to see from AI? What would be good AI? They'd often say, I want characters who are incredibly intelligent and human-like and make all these decisions and can outsmart me and outflank me. But ultimately, from people doing playtests and all this sort of stuff, we find that this is not really what players want. They want AI that is interesting to fight against and they actually have a chance to win against. Two is that AI, ultimately, in a lot of cases, we do actually want to have some level of predictability to it. So in like Hitman, for example, is a game where you play as this assassin going around and ruining people's days. You should be able to have a mental model of how the game works in your head and to be able to make these interesting plans of like, if I make a sound over there, that should alert a guard who will move over there and do this thing. This allows us to make these interesting plans where we're not just playing in these sort of second-to-second moments, but we're thinking several steps ahead of, I'm going to distract this guy, move him over there, make a trap, get past him. If the AI is completely unpredictable and wild, that can work for some games like Alien Isolation, but for a game like this, we want to be able to have it where the player can make much more tactical choices. We want the player to be able to think ahead and plan. Three is that what designers have found is that it's very useful for the AI to tell you what it's thinking. Again, this is great for planning. So this is Mark of the Ninja. The AI have speech bubbles and thought bubbles over their heads telling you what they're planning to do next, what their current state is, what their current mood is. We can see where they can see, where they can hear. All of these sorts of things allows the player to create a plan because they can see in front of them how the game world is put together. But it's also a great way of giving an illusion of more intelligence than there actually is, perhaps. In Splinter Cell Blacklist, for example, the guards in this game have quite a large number of sort of things it can be aware of. One being like if you leave a door open in some secret compound, the guard could be aware of that and slightly raise its awareness level. Ubisoft found that players never even noticed that if an early playtest. They had no idea that the guards were aware of this. So they just had the guards very explicitly say, like, who left that door open? That's making me mad. And players be like, oh my God, these guards are so smart. So having it so that the characters are actually like expressing and vocalizing exactly what they're thinking allows for a greater show of realism. Four is that AI can be used to sort of modulate the pace for the player's experience. Perfect example of this is Left 4 Dead. This game has what they call the AI director, where it is kind of tracking how intense the game is currently for the player. If the player is fighting loads of zombies and being completely swarmed by the special infected and they're losing loads of health and all these sorts of things, then the game knows that, well, that's cool, that's fun, but it's too intense to keep that going forever. The player kind of needs a break. So it tells the zombies to back off for a while, and it tells them, the special infected, to not spawn for a while, to give the player a little bit of a cooldown, and then it can ramp it back up again. Similar system is used in the new Dead Space game, but it kind of means that the game is always thinking about what would be most interesting for the player right now, what would be best for the player, and how can we keep modulating that experience. And then 5 would be to acknowledge the player. Just like really clearly just be like, hey, you're part of the game world and we're aware of you. Classic example is the Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War games. These have these amazing experiences with these orc captains who you can fight them and maybe like chop this guy's arm off, and then half an hour later he appears and is like, oi, you chopped my arm off, and he's got like a metal arm on, and it's like really speaking exactly to the player's experience, really like remembers exactly how you interacted and creates this much more personal relationship with the player and the AI. Or in Metal Gear Solid, they have a sort of system where the actions that you do, the AI kind of learns from them in a simple way of just unlocking AI behaviors over time. But if you're doing a lot of headshots against guards and that's your way of playing, suddenly you start seeing guards putting helmets on to sort of scupper those plans, forcing you to change your tactics and making the game more interesting and exciting because you're not just doing the same thing over and over again. So ultimately, the most important thing is that we need to decide on like the goals for the gameplay. Like, what is the experience we want to give to the player? What are the feelings we want the player to have? What is the fantasy, like being Batman? What is the fantasy we're trying to give to the player? And then use AI to support those goals. What are some ways that we can change how the AI works so that it is giving the player that experience or those feelings? And then center the AI around the player. Make sure that the player always feels like the most important character in the world, and the game supports that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
I think we've got some time for some questions, if there are any from the audience. And we have some microphones that we can run around.
Thank you very much. So AI in games has obviously progressed quite a lot in a very short space of time, and one of the most recent progressions has been the creation of like completely kind of independent AI-driven ecosystems within games, with the classic example being the indie game Rain World, where a literal ecosystem is created with like the different kind of animals within this ecosystem coded to have certain behaviors, and they interact with each other independent from the playable character. So what are your thoughts on like that progress and kind of constructing complex AI ecosystems within games, and especially as we kind of move into VR as well? How do you think AI in that sense could impact VR?
Yeah, so in terms of, so the question was about this game Rain World, which is a very interesting game in that it has this sort of ecosystem where all of the characters are kind of doing their own thing and following their own goals. It has some amazingly interesting gameplay, but one thing that I found with it is that it is very obtuse. It's very hard to sort of understand what is going on in the system. Part of that is fun, is that it's like the goal of the game is to sort of figure out what on earth is even going on. But I feel like there were ways that the game could have been a little bit more player-facing, just so you can kind of get into it a little bit easier would be my thought. So I think if that was exactly the goal they're going for, is just to make this incredibly obtuse world, then they totally succeeded. But there are ways for games to have those complex, ongoing sort of ecosystems, but in ways that are always driven towards the central player experience. Thank you for your question.
Any more audience questions? Yep, we've got some over here.
Great talk. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question about the predictability of the AI. I'm wondering, like, because I have been playing with the AIs to simulate some certain scenarios. One of the challenges has always been, I want AI to do something, but in a lot of times it just randomly does things, which is super counterproductive. So I guess in games, this will also happen a lot, right? You have a main mission for the AI, but on the other side, you want to maintain the creativity of the AI. But what are the tricks or the trade-offs you are making over there for AI to make your game interesting?
Yeah, so one way that people have put it is, I think one of the like Halo designers have said, is that if you hit this certain enemy, then it should always run away from you. So you kind of have that level of predictability. If I hit this enemy, it's always going to run away. But where it goes, that I don't know. So you can have these like layers of this how much I understand about the system, this much is beyond my understanding. And that is in of itself a mental model that you can have of being like, I know this bit is the sort of fog of war. I don't know what's going to happen here. So having multiple layers of like, this is the stuff I do understand, this is the stuff I don't, is a good first step towards creating some predictability that the player, predictability and unpredictability that the player can actually work with. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. In this era of games being so intertwined with AI, is it possible to make a game that is considered good that does not involve an AI, or do you think it's crucial to have an AI?
Well, I mean, the term like AI in games is pretty vague in the first place, because we can think of like some classic examples of AI, like a guard in a Metal Gear Solid game, is very clear. Like, it's an AI guy, has inputs and outputs and all these rule things. But then like a Goomba in a Super Mario Brothers, is that AI? Like, it has decisions it's making, sort of. It's got like these runtime. Is it only an AI because it's got googly eyes and we're like, well, it's a character, it's a creature. Does Tetris have an AI in it? It's like, it doesn't have any characters or anything like that, but it does have some kind of algorithm for sorting the blocks in an interesting way. So I think it's just, AI is such a broad thing that we could probably find some example of something we could describe as AI in every game. Yes, thank you.
I like that last comment very much, about Tetris having an AI. Mark, just before we thank you and say goodbye, you're working on a game yourself right now, and it's a puzzle game primarily, but is there anything that you would describe as AI in the game? Have you got any little things moving around, or?
That's a good question. I did work on some AI, but it was incredibly difficult, and so I kind of basically scrapped that, having little robots moving around and stuff. So I guess to answer your question, you can have amazing games that don't have AI. It's my game, which is not finished and may never will be.
I thoroughly recommend looking up Mark's journey into game development on YouTube. It's one of the most accessible and interesting introductions to someone's mind slowly melting as they encounter various obstacles. It's a great series. Really, really recommend it. Thank you so much, Mark, for opening today. Could we please thank our speaker one more time, and we'll get our next speaker set up.